I wanted to talk a little bit more about self-compassion and do that in a practical way by doing a specific self-compassion exercise right here, something I often do with clients. I've mentioned this connection between shame and self-criticism, right? We are criticized by other voices early in our lives, and we internalize those voices. Before long, we can do it all by ourselves. We don't need that external voice. It lives inside us. Well, that self-criticism is shame's most prominent symptom. And I want you to view a scale with opposing sides. Criticism feeds self-criticism, as we talked about historically, but also within a given day. If we're self-critical in a given day, we will be more critical with others and vice versa. And compassion and self-compassion has a similar trajectory, but it's an opposing force. So if we're more compassionate with ourselves, we'll be more compassionate with others and vice versa. This is really handy. If on a given day you're finding it hard to be kind to yourself in the morning, you can engage in acts of compassion with others, and in the evening, it'll be easier to be compassionate with yourself. So these are on opposite sides of the scale because they're mutually exclusive states. If we're in compassion, we won't be in criticism and vice versa. And because of that connection with shame, working with self-connection and getting out of criticism is, in those moments, which we can multiply and multiply and multiply, it's getting out of shame. So here's an exercise to do that. And we're going to oppose those forces. I take this from Kristen Neff in her book, Self-Compassion, which I highly recommend to a lot of my clients. So when we find that consistent message, and they usually are consistent, of self-criticism, right, those ones that ring in our head again and again, we want to slow down and really hear it. So it's not some muffled, amorphous thing, but it's very particular. So for me, that's easy, right? For me, it's, Jeff, you're not enough. And, well, that can go anywhere, right? Jeff, you're not successful enough. Jeff, you're not a good enough partner or a good enough dad or a good enough son. And then we want to slow down and say, well, whose voice is that, right? What was that critical voice before it became internalized and was self-criticism? Well, okay. I know whose voice that was, and I see that person clearly in my mind right now. And as we hold that self-critical message, we want to acknowledge, okay, it's painful and it's familiar, but familiar does not mean true. That's a really easy thing. We associate the familiar with the true. And we want to slow down and say, okay, we've got that embodied critical side, and we want to build up this embodied self-compassionate side. What is the mantra that I want to rehearse to myself in those times of pain that sounds both helpful, compassionate, and true? Mine can't be, oh, Jeff, don't worry. You're not, it's not true that you're not enough. You're extraordinarily successful. That sounds like bullshit because it doesn't ring true. It sounds Pollyannic to me. But if I slow down, I can find something that's both helpful and true. And my favorite one over time has been one I just simply stole from Brene Brown. Jeff, you're doing the best you can. And I like that. It is comforting. I know that I work hard on my personal growth, and I know that I'm doing better and better. And, it's also true because I know it. So, Jeff, you're doing the best you can. And I want to embody that just like I did that self-critical message. Whose voice is that? And we want to get very particular here. It can be hard. Sometimes we need to look at the compassion of our therapist or somebody caring in our lives. Sometimes we actually have to create a compassionate voice because they've been so devoid in our own lives. Well, let's get so particular, right? It's not just my mom in general, that compassion that I need. It's my mom in that particular moment when I was sad at 5 years old and she got down on the ground with me. It's that posture, that voice that I want to hear say, Jeff, you're doing the best you can. So it looks like this now that I've built all that out, and that takes time, right? It can take time to find that self-compassionate voice. It can take time to identify these particular messages, and that's okay. But once we've got that, the next time I get into that pain of, Jeff, you're not enough, I can say, oh, I recognize that. I've made that concrete. It's not just a low hum anymore. All right, Jeff, in this moment, it makes sense, given who you are and where you come from, that you'd rehearse this painful message of, Jeff, you're not enough. But the truth is, that's that bridge between these opposing sides of the scale. You're doing the best you can. And to slow down and really feel what it's like to imagine that compassionate voice telling me that, to practice that feeling in my body, to say, oh, that feels like an opening in my chest to a warmth. I can feel my shoulders relaxing and pulling back. I can feel myself again getting more open to the world instead of closed off and defensive. So that exercise can be really helpful. I wanted to give it because I do think it's perfectly safe and very helpful to begin an exercise like that with yourself, right? Even outside of therapy, if that's not available to you at this time.